Hello and welcome to episode 52. We have now done a year's worth of recordings. We've actually recorded those in less than a year. I think our year anniversary is mid-October-ish, mid to late October. But this is episode 52, which will go live off the top of my head, third week of October. But yeah, mad. 52 episodes. That was the initial goal. We said we're not going to look at whether we think it's been successful or it's successful in any way, shape, or form until we had done a year. So now we're going to have a look, and I already know what the answer is. But yeah, it's mad to think 52 episodes. But we saved it for a special guest. Let's say you'll definitely recognise the company, and I'm sure you'll recognise the face as well. But I'll hand over to Arthur to introduce himself and the company, and then we'll dive in. So over to you, Arthur.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jamie. This is super exciting. Hey, everybody. Arthur Castillo here, head of Dark Social and Evangelism at Chili Piper. Crazy freaking role title. I'm sure we're going to be talking about it today. I love this, bringing me back to my sales roots. I spent seven plus years in sales, and for whatever reason, the Chili Piper marketing team thought I had the chops to do something in marketing. So finding myself in this unique role with more of a background in sales, but trying to bring that same mentality into the marketing department. So excited to chat more about this today.
You said, like you said, it's a hell of a job title, a bit of a mouthful. For those who have no idea what Dark Social and Evangelism is, do you want to give us a layman's term definition?
Yeah. So Dark Social, how you can think about it is really word of mouth, but I think it's scaled word of mouth. So traditionally, let's say, 10, 15 years ago, most of the conversations you would have with other peers like you would occur maybe at an annual conference, right? You finally get together, you get to talk to a room full of your peers, ask them their challenges, maybe some unique opportunities. And that has changed dramatically. Now, the way we use things like LinkedIn communities, we get access to our peers almost on a day-to-day basis. So I think this concept has always existed, but really the maturity of the internet, how we use certain social media platforms, how we use these communities to initiate these buying conversations. I think we are heading down a peer-to-peer buying motion. We're seeing it more and more. Buyers want to do most of the research themselves, and now they actually have the tools and the infrastructure and access to their peers to do that. So that's a little bit on the Dark Social piece. I guess the biggest piece there is that marketers don't have the tools to really see where these buying conversations are originating or where they're being triggered. Most of their attribution software tells them, hey, looks like it was organic or direct, so we should invest more in Google ads. But really, maybe they listened to this podcast right here and they said, I never heard of Chili Piper. They asked a peer. Then they said, yeah, of course I use it to increase my inbound conversion. And lo and behold, they type it into Google and marketers think, oh, that's where we should invest more money, but maybe it should be in sponsoring podcasts. So that's kind of the uniqueness of this Dark Social is that we know these buying conversations are happening. We know peer-to-peer is happening, but marketers can't really see where that buying trigger was originated. In terms of evangelism, I think the simplest definition that I kind of pitched to our founders in the marketing team was that you can't offer up a solution until your audience is aware of the problem. And I didn't feel like we really articulated the problem that we were solving here at Chili Piper. So that's really what I'm evangelizing. I'm trying to bring to market the fact that a lot of B2B revenue teams might be leaving some money on the table simply by their inbound lead process or that handoff from marketing to sales. And I know marketers traditionally have been measured on leads and they're not looking down funnel enough. But for those marketers that are, a lot of the time they're very surprised that, oh my gosh, we just had 100 demo requests and only 20 of them made it to a first call with sales. Like, something's got to give, right? So that's where I'm looking at it in terms of evangelism. There's different buckets that I pitch that I'm sure we could get into if be interesting for the audience. But essentially, it's a role that's trying to match what we're seeing in the public, which is more of this peer-to-peer buying, more of these private DMs, whether it's through LinkedIn or these communities that we can't really see where the journey originated. And back to the definition is just you can't offer up a solution like Chili Piper unless your audience is aware of the problem. So that's where I spend a lot of my time.
There you go. And I've seen the evangelist role pop up increasingly, I'd say, over the past year. So I think it's starting to embed itself as a I don't know, more mature function in perhaps more forward-thinking companies rather than traditional big corporates. But you've covered it a little bit there. But for those, I'd be shocked if anyone doesn't know who Chili Piper are. But for those who don't know who Chili Piper are, what is it you do?
Yeah, we are scheduling and routing software at its core. I think I kind of hinted at one of the business problems that we solve, which is most of that high intent demand, those demo requests, people raising their hands, trying to speak with sales, they never actually get a chance to speak with sales. Sometimes they might speak with your competition before. So we include a variety of tools to allow your buyers really direct access to your sales team and eliminate that back and forth, whether it's they're coming in through the website, whether it's more outbound and it's cold calls on the fly, or you're emailing them or DMing them on LinkedIn. And then there's more of the lead routing piece as well, where it's not necessarily in the moment of highest intent where they're scheduling that right there. But let's say you go to a conference or you just had a webinar and you're looking to distribute those leads to your sales team based on certain triggers. It's really a suite of tools that allow buyers a better way to connect with your sales team and increase that inbound conversion and just getting your sales team in front of those prospects that could have potential of buying your product or service.
And we are customers of Chili Piper. It's very, very good. So we can definitely give a solid review or recommendation for people to go and check it out. But okay, so that's the formalities out of the way.
Yes.
We're going to be talking about why inbound SDRs shouldn't exist, which is potentially quite a controversial topic, only because I'm thinking of some of the big popular names on LinkedIn who have defined roles for inbound SDRs, or MDRs, as some of them call them. So I guess the place to start is probably introducing what the concept of SDRs and their roles, but in today's market, and then we'll go into reasons for, reasons against, all that juicy stuff. So evolution of the sales process and SDRs. Do you want to, from your perspective, how has that changed in recent time?
Yeah, I think this is a little bit of my qualm with sales, in that I feel like we're over segmented, right? So before it was the traditional sales rep, and sometimes they were even in charge of customer success, right? They couldn't just say whatever they needed to say to get the customer over the line. They actually had to service that customer. I do think, for the record, that's a good way to split it, right? Sales, they're in charge of net new. I think there are some companies I've heard, modern companies, that are starting to tie a little bit more of that sales compensation to retention. But the over segmentation, right? So sales, you're responsible for net new. Then I don't know where this came about, probably the era of predictable revenue, Aaron Ross, where they said, okay, sellers have a different skill set than maybe outbound hunters, right? They have demo, they have to nurture the relationship, they have to follow up. What if we segment that out and keep sellers, aka account executives, focused on the demo and ushering that prospect through the buyer's journey? And then we have a separate function that is just used to prospect, typically outbound. As if that wasn't enough, now we said, hey, we're getting some inbound leads, and maybe some of our AEs aren't getting in touch with them quick enough. Let's create inbound SDRs. So now we have outbound SDRs that focus on just hunting. Then we have inbound SDRs that are responsible for getting in touch with people that maybe have shown some interest, maybe have engaged with some content. So that's really the function that what started as one single sales rep that was responsible for bringing people in, sometimes servicing them. Then we over segmented that and said, hey, we need customer success. Makes sense. Then it was like, hey, this person can't usher prospects through the buyer's journey and still prospect for themselves. So let's create a role for that. And then they can't get in touch with the inbound leads quick enough. So let's create a role for that. So a lot of over segmentation in sales that I think has been orchestrated as part of a company sales process. But nowadays, I think more and more what we're seeing and what we're going to be talking about here today is that it doesn't line up to how a buyer wants to buy in today's modern world.
Do you think I don't want to talk about COVID again, I feel like it's, spoken about a lot, but do you think the massive peak in the SaaS market in terms of company growth, the ridiculous valuations, I think people have phrased it as like very bloated sales teams. Do you think that exacerbated the issue of we've got all this money, all these leads, sales are skyrocketing, we need to break out these defined roles to be able to cope with the sales? Do you think that exacerbated the situation?
For sure. It had to have added something to it. And I do think, like, in ways, a lot of the go-to-market for many of these SaaS companies has been traditionally outbound sales, right? Brute force to 10 million ARR, then maybe start investing in marketing and some other things. So I think even before that time, that was traditionally the model of most software companies go to market. Hey, let's invest in sales. Let's not really think about marketing or partnerships or community or anything like that. We're just going to get in front of people that we think are good fits, and kind of this spray and pray method. To your point, I think when companies raise money, what is their first typical hire? I'd say let's ramp up the sales team. So with these bloated valuations and companies getting millions of dollars when some of them had only really like 2 million in ARR, and they say let's go ahead and hire a bunch of sales reps because we're going to achieve crazy growth. And then that doesn't happen. So what happens if you've hired a bunch of sales roles and you haven't achieved that growth? Well, what we just saw, right? A lot of unfortunate layoffs that are happening, companies trimming their headcount, and leading to it feeling like, okay, if we hired a bunch of sales reps and we're not growing at the rate, then it's maybe a little bit of a bloated sales team. I do think it was happening before this, but I'm sure it has exacerbated the whole bloated sales team.
And obviously now the market here has returned, let's say, or shrank. It's more of a realistic market. I think what we're seeing is a lot of companies are trimming those sales teams, and the roles are becoming more full cycle again.
Yeah.
But the issue is that the skill sets, because they were broken out, you've got quite a few salespeople who have never done one or the other. They've only done like you said, they've only booked demos or they've only dealt with inbounds. So have you seen or heard a trend in full cycle coming back in, becoming more fashionable again?
I have, and maybe to your point, it's a little bit of necessity, right? If you've already had this bloated sales team, and I've heard this and I've seen this posted about on LinkedIn, where you're starting to only maybe keep those account executives that do know how to prospect, that do know how to talk to that outbound sale, because that is very different than an inbound sale. Inbound, there's probably a little bit of declared pain, right? Hey, we have this issue that we're going through. A lot of the time for outbound, they're getting the job done. They're getting from point A to point B, and you're kind of trying to shine a light and saying, hey, did you know there was a better way of doing things? And a lot of people shy away from change. So it's a completely different sale. I have seen it maybe out of necessity. I think, like, my hope is that this continues to happen. And I think as the way buyers want to buy, and I'm sure we've all seen these studies that especially millennial buyers, they want to be as self-service as possible, right? Really only speak to sales rep when they're ready to buy. So I think as we see what the customer and the buyers want in terms of how they want to purchase, I do think we'll see more of a shift back to that full cycle AE. I've seen a couple of companies do it. I know Scott Leese, for example, doesn't believe in SDRs, and he scaled, I think he's like 6 times VP sales, never had an SDR org, has always made everything full cycle or worked really well with marketing. So there are sales leaders that are out there that don't necessarily believe in this and want to bring back that full cycle rep, but I think we're still a little bit of ways away from that.
Yeah, I think I could just I guess a bit of background about our sales function, which has changed massively over the past year. But we had some sales guys that said, this is a slight paraphrasing of the quote, but it's like, how am I meant to find time to book my own demos? Like, I haven't got an SDR; they need to book me demos, and it's the guys on the other side of the pond in this particular situation were far more adept to booking their own demos. They came from a recruitment background, right? So they were very familiar with business development and prospecting. So yeah, it was just really interesting to have an AE sort of say to us internally, like, how am I meant to find time to book my own demos? Like, that was quite surprising. But that shows just the massive disparity between skill sets.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, we've bit of background there, but in terms of your view, then, so like in your opinion, your view, why should inbound SDRs not exist? I think there's MDR as a marketing development representative is another job title I've heard floated about, but like in your view, why shouldn't it exist?
Yeah, just along the lines of what we've been talking about, it's not lining up to how buyers want to buy. And if most of them are, let's say if Gartner and Forrester studies are correct, where they're doing 60, 70, 80% of the buying journey themselves, think about that first brand touch point, right? Hey, I've spoken with maybe 3 of my peers. They've given me 3 tools to look into, each one of them, pros and cons. I already have my short list. I've identified that this is a problem. We're scoping out our vendors. And then I go to submit a demo request to these 3 companies. Now I hop on that call and I say, look, I want to talk about my use case. I want to understand pricing to see if it's within like my budget. And typically that first call is with a junior SDR that says, oh, those are great questions for my AE. Or, ooh, yeah, let me jot that down. I can't answer any of your questions. I can't show you the product, and I cannot share pricing with you. And this, let's say hypothetically, is a buyer that has gone through 80% of their journey. In ways, we're penalizing them for doing research and coming to us and saying, hey, your first brand touch point with potentially buying our product or service is with one of the most junior sales reps that really doesn't offer any value. They are just putting another gate, putting another time on your calendar, extending that sales cycle and saying, let me see what time works. In essence, they're a glorified appointment setter. And there's tools and technology that can replace that. I think as we're talking about now, there's been this over segmentation of sales, but I think we're coming back to this full cycle rep. So where does that inbound SDR fit into the modern buyer's journey? To me, and I've seen a bunch of comments and I've seen a bunch of customers as well, when they actually go through that chili piper process, they say, wow, that was pretty smooth. That was nice. I got booked with an AE. I think this might be nice for my prospects. So to me, it just doesn't match up. I think in the past where sellers typically had that information and a buyer needed to speak with sales to do that, but now they're getting that information elsewhere. So all things being equal, what is something that the buyer needs that they think the seller has, and they typically ask them as one of the first questions. If they see, let's say, those 3 competitions, those 3 software products as equal competitors, the only thing that the seller has that the buyer thinks that they don't have is pricing. So they're going to ask for that right away. And if you can't answer that on a first call, or at least give them a range and say, hey, let's book a time next week to have it with an AE, and then the AE asks the same questions, and then it goes on to the sales engineer. So sometimes it takes 3 calls before they even get to see the product. I just think it's not in line with how people buy today. And you have to strike while the iron is hot. I'm sure you've probably experienced this too, where if there's any delays or priorities take place, they might not reopen that evaluation for another year, right? So, or in some cases, if that vendor is actually getting them through the process as quickly as possible, then the other ones that are trying to schedule for their AEs, they're like, hey, I'm already late stage with this company. Why would I restart and go through the same process? So to me, the bottom line is I don't think it matches with how buyers want to buy today. I think it's very company centric, this inbound SDR process where it doesn't serve the customer. It's really very self-serving, trying to ask things like budget, timeline, decision makers, where if they've identified a problem and they've come inbound, you should try and help them solve it as quick as possible and not put a gate or a junior SDR as their first brand touch point.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the same in the US, but it kind of reminds me, like, whenever I ring my car insurer, I get the automated response that says, right, just gonna some security questions. Can you just put in your registration plate or your policy number? And then it says, can you confirm your postcode? And that's the point at which it goes, right, we'll connect you with an agent. The agent answers and go, oh, I'm just going to ask you a few security questions. Can I have your policy number, your registration plate, and can you confirm your postcode? I'm like, I've literally just done that. It reminds me of that. And that's same as when you go to renew your internet, right? You ring up and you say, I'd like to cancel because you're going to put my price up. And then, oh, sorry, this isn't cancellations. You're like, well, I rang the cancellation number. I've got to pass you over to this other. You get passed over to the other person. They're like, no, I can't do that myself. I've got to speak to my manager. I'm going to pass you on again. And it's just like the most elongated, ridiculous process. And it's the same sort of principle, isn't it? I can't remember the exact fact, but it's a crazy stat. Something like, I'm sure it's like 70 or 80% of purchases are made with the vendor that comes back to the buyer quickest. Yep. Because, like you said, nowadays people have spent circa even 200 days, sometimes 200-300 days in the full buying journey. 2/3 of which are spent researching, chatting with friends on YouTube, Dark Social, like you said, Reddit, whatever, speaking to colleagues, peers. Mm-hmm. The point at which they get to the vendor, they are ready to buy. They've got the budget, they've done their research. All they want is to tick a few more boxes of, right, what's the best price I can get? And just to clarify, it does do what I think it'll do. Yep. And then they're ready to buy. So, like you're saying, if they're being slowed down, it's especially in business rather than as an end consumer at home, it's infuriating. And it's a very, very very interesting decision to make, like you said, to add another step to the journey.
Yeah, I think you are extending it, and in ways, it does not serve what the buyer is trying to do. And I love that example that you gave of, like, everybody knows that process of getting passed between different departments, and everybody's saying, oh no, that's not my job to help you out with, let me pass you over to my colleague. It feels like that, right? And it's crazy, especially, not to mention, let's say this was like a 3 times customer, right? That they had already purchased it and they moved to a new role and they're like, yes, I know the tool that I want. And we're still making these people go through the exact same sales process as if they never even heard of the company. Like, it just has to match up to where they're at. And I don't think you can execute at speed what the buyer wants if you do have an inbound SDR, unless, like, they're like, cool, you're qualified, let me pass you off to somebody right now. Maybe that's a little bit of a better process, but typically it's, okay, let me book you next week, or how does Friday look, and all of that. And I just think you're putting an extra step in the sales process.
You think, if you think about B2C or D2C, direct to consumer e-commerce, right? They spend millions a year on optimizing the number of clicks it takes to get to the basket by removing as many clicks as possible. So it's exactly the same principle. Like, you're de-optimizing the journey by adding an additional gate or checkpoint, and it just makes absolutely no sense. I don't understand where, why someone, whoever the first person was, thought, we're going to add another step here just to, I don't know, have more control, have more parts to the funnel. I don't know what it was, but I know that there is a Cognizant, a big example. I think everyone will have heard of Cognizant, but they are famous for having created a role, potentially not created it themselves, but they have a role called an MDR, a marketing development representative, which for them actually sits between an SDR and an AE. And the MDR position is actually a promotion up from an SDR for those that have shown skill and aptitude at dealing with the leads, and they only get inbound leads if they get promoted to that MDR. Their SDRs are pure outbound, their MDRs are pure inbounds before they get them promoted to an AE. What's your thoughts on that setup?
Yeah, I was going to say somewhat similar to what we have here at Chili Piper. So anybody requesting a demo of Chili Piper will get routed to an AE. Our SDR org is 100% outbound. I think when I think about Cognizant, they could sell to a bunch of different verticals. And that's where maybe it makes sense if they have, let's say, 3 verticals that they know close rates are high. It's a really good match in terms of the type of audience you traditionally sell to. Then yeah, those could be routed to AEs. Maybe they sell to different verticals that aren't traditionally good fits, and there does need to be another layer of qualification there of like, hey, typically we don't sell to your industry for this reason. Do you think we can still solve your problem, and have them sell you a little bit more? I just really struggle with like, how is this a sales role, right? Are you, if this MDR role in Cognism is maybe able to talk a little bit about their use case, they're a little bit more familiar with the product. If they can talk about the pricing and then offer a little bit of value on that first call before getting to the AE, okay, I'm like open to it. But traditionally, I haven't really seen that. They're measured on meetings booked. They're not measured on, wow, that was a good discovery, or you've uncovered something. It's typically just, okay, did you get the meeting booked and scheduled on an AE's calendar? I really struggle to see how that's a sales role. That's almost like an appointment setter and receptionist. So I think like, look, for them, it may make sense based on the amount of verticals that they could sell to. But I don't know if it makes sense for a lot of companies.
Yeah, I was this. This isn't meant to be a slating of their setup. I think the MDR, for I guess for a bit of impartiality, I think the MDR role, from what I've read, from what they've shared, is the MDR is far more knowledgeable around the content that they put out, and they're dealing with the leads that have come through as a result of engagement with a particular piece of content. But I think it's that they are able to have a more in-depth conversation about the problem based on the content that person's engaged with. But to your point, why an AE can do that. So why does there have to be another role? I guess it could be they've got such a high volume of inbounds that for them to have enough the full amount would be a serious number of AEs that probably cost a lot more than an MDR. So I guess maybe it's a way of mitigating cost. I don't know. We're hypothesizing here.
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head, and that's really what predictable revenue was built on, right? If you can create certain sections of the sales funnel and say, hey, this is going to cost us, I don't know, $30,000 to run this month, but we've generated $500,000 in pipeline, and our AEs are focusing more on those higher quality opportunities, it all becomes like, you're right. Is it cost savings at certain points in our sales process? But that's where I don't think you're taking into account what the buyer actually wants. Sure, this is like very customer centric. Great. You were able to decouple a sales rep's role and get some cheap labor, often people that are fresh out of university, into this role of glorified appointment setters. And you're able to keep your costs down there. But at the same time, what does that look like? This is where, I don't know, maybe I'll get some flack for this, but I think like AEs are sometimes a little bit entitled, right? Of like, hey, if they're not ready to buy now, or if they're unqualified, would you not rather have 2 unqualified leads and 8 that are good versus, let's say, having those go through an SDR and losing 50% of that lead volume, which is what we're seeing on Chili Piper's side. So I don't know. I think it's like, if you ask any AE, if you ask any sales manager, VP of sales, do you have enough pipeline? Most of them will say no. But at the same time, we're so quick to disqualify or say, oh, that person was unqualified. It's like, are you willing to let maybe a couple of bad leads in, knowing that you are going to get more pipeline by just brushing those aside? And I think the top sales reps, what they do better than most average sales reps is they disqualify out as much as they qualify in. So I think it's just a part of the process, but for whatever reason, it's like, oh my gosh, lo and behold, if an AE gets an unqualified lead, everybody gets to hear about it. I think it's just part of the process. Like, yeah, that's going to happen. Some people are going to come to you and they're not going to have a big enough problem to solve, or maybe it's just not right timing. And what I would say to those AEs is put them in your funnel. Like, you'd be surprised. Hey, they're not qualified to buy now. 6 months from now, they might raise a Series A and they might come knocking on your door. If you treated them with respect and said, hey, this is not a good time now, but let's touch base in 6 months. If you're like, hey, you're not qualified and you can't see a demo, they'll probably go to your competitor. So I don't know. Just some thoughts on how this whole process plays out in a company. I think, yeah, there's a little bit of entitlement there from the AE side.
Yeah, for sure. So, okay, so reasons against, we're saying overlapping roles and inefficiencies, lack of specialization, in that they only focus on one. Fragmented customer experience, I think, is probably the biggest one there, the most important. To play devil's advocate then, what could be 3 reasons for breaking out the role?
I think we kind of hit on one with the Cognism example. Let's say you do sell to multiple verticals, and I don't know, B2B environmental tech or manufacturing tech, and these are like really good verticals, but there's these 6 to 10 other verticals that sometimes can be good fits, but oftentimes they aren't. Sure, maybe it makes sense that, like, for those 3 verticals, they go straight to AEs, and for the other ones that you're a little unsure of, or they don't necessarily meet qualification or your ideal customer profile, okay, maybe then you route them to an SDR. I think if you can have your SDRs offer up a better first call experience where maybe not showing the product, maybe they do have some sort of interactive walkthrough that they can say, hey, yeah, you mentioned this, and this is where we'd be able to handle that. If they can discuss pricing, maybe answer some of the buyer's questions, at least have an FAQ of the top questions that inbound leads typically ask, and at least they can start with something like that. Yeah, if they're offering a little bit of more of a value on that first call, then I think it makes sense. And
almost as if it is more consultative to say, look, this let's call it a pre-demo call, whatever. It's 15 minutes. We're going to ask you a series of questions so that when you do get to the demo, the AE can spend a full 30 minutes showing you the exact problem statement that you've identified based on your strategic objectives, so they can maximize that time rather than rushing through the demo, perhaps. So it could be seen as a way of making the demo more worthwhile, let's say.
Yeah, I think that's the idea we pitch to buyers, but I think they see beyond that. It's typically not valuable, but I agree. If you could somehow make that first call, and maybe you even share customer examples of problems that they came in with and said, hey, look, typically we're speaking with companies about these 3 problems. This is how, like, they handle that. Does that resonate? And then you're like going into it more further there. When the questions are self-serving of like, do you have budget and what's your timeline? Like, if you solve a big enough problem at a fair price, like that is just a byproduct of a good sales cycle. You don't have to ask that up front for the demo to be personalized. So yeah, I think if like they can maybe share some customer examples or really identify the problem and get them excited and say, this is what we're going to determine with the call with the AE of whether or not like we're actually going to do on the call analysis. We're going to run some dashboards based on your CRM. We're going to look at your data and see if this makes sense. We're kind of getting the prospect excited about, oh my gosh, I'm going to learn how I benchmark against maybe the industry, where I can improve my own conversion rates and offer value on that first call. And I heard my friend Carl Ferreira say this once of like, if they wouldn't pay you for that call, you're not good enough like consultant or trusted advisor. So that's the way I look at it. If that first call can somehow be valuable to the buyer, where you're educating them, maybe leading with some unknown problems of, hey, you're coming in with this, but did you know this affects X, Y, and Z? Just different ways of, rather than just like, hey, do you have budget? What's your schedule look like? Let's get you on the calendar. I think gone are those days. And that's why I really do struggle with this role. But to play devil's advocate, yeah, if this SDR could actually talk about the problem, get the customer excited and outline what exactly it is they'll learn on the next call as well, then maybe it makes sense.
Yeah, it's interesting actually. That last thing you just said there, of listening to their problem and then saying, "Have you thought of X, Y, and Z?" I was speaking to Jen from Lavender,
Yep.
and she was saying that one thing that Lavender are big believers in is becoming an expert of the problem. But
Hmm.
what she meant by that was that rather than just default to yes, you need Lavender, they actually coach that prospect through other alternatives that are free of charge that they should try before considering Lavender and getting their wallet out, because they
Wow.
become a trusted advisor. So to your point there, maybe it's a case of they're having a conversation, and that MDR, whatever you want to call it, SDR, inbound SDR, is able to say, look, I've had your request. I just wanted to double check. Have you tried A, B, or C? Because we've heard and seen a lot in the market that those three things can actually completely remove the need for a product or solution like ours. But if you have, let's have a chat. I'm sure we can help you tick off that strategic goal or objective. Like, what's your thoughts on that? Because it's almost like anti-sales, isn't it?
I love it. I love it. I've got a chance to do that a little bit, even with some of our competitors at Chili Piper, and it just, everybody has their walls up when they're speaking with a sales rep, right? And it's, if you come at it with this anti-sales, talk about that wall coming down instantly of like, wow, this person is not just trying to make another dollar. I can't smell their commission breath. They're actually looking out for my best interest. Like, oh my goodness, like now I can tell you all of my problems, right? Yeah, I have tried this, I have tried that, and this is what it's led to, and we still haven't. Like, I think it's such a unique, and you often don't see it, like differentiator in the sales process of someone taking a step back and saying, hey, before, like you said, pulling out your wallet, have you tried these three things? And what's been the result of that? And I think that's such a key question that's missed in the discovery of jumping to the solution. Hey, I heard the problem, jump into the solution. Why don't you ask them, okay, how long has this been going on? What have you tried to solve this? You're really trying to get them to dig deeper and self-reflect on, okay, yeah, like we have tried these things and they still haven't worked. And lo and behold, what you're actually doing on the back end is kind of setting yourself up to say, okay, you've tried all of these things. Now let me talk to you about my solution. This is how we've actually solved it. Let me talk to you about a couple of customers that have gone through the exact same thing. They tried X, Y, and Z. It didn't work out for them for this reason. Sounds very similar to you. Now let's talk about my solution. And I think like that's where the prospect is like, wow, they really understand me. They've talked to other buyers just like me that have tried these different things. And it sounds like they might have a solution to fix my problem. I love that approach. So kudos to Jen Allen of Lavender.
Yeah, it's definitely. I was trying to think of like a real world example, and we're contemplating having our website outsourced to an agency to rebuild the website. I built the current version of it using Webflow, but it took me months to learn how to use Webflow. And I
Yeah.
think if we were going through that process and I was speaking to some of these agencies and they said, look, do you have a fairly basic understanding of how to use Webflow? Great. Okay. If you do, have you heard of it's called Relume Library, which is 30 quid a month, and it gives you predefined templates that you can copy and paste into Webflow and you can do it yourself. If you have tried that and you just want us to do it a lot quicker because you're up against timelines, or you
Mhm.
want something that you don't have to build from the ground up yourself, by all means, let's have a chat. And that, for me, that would have been like you said, a tick in the box of, okay, this agency's given me a much cheaper alternative, but they are aware that they could do it a lot more quickly, and I wouldn't have to learn how to do it myself. And I think that would have been, for me as a buyer in marketing, that would have been a huge tick in the box, like you said. But yeah, that episode with Jen, I think it's either coming out very soon or it is already out. But yeah, go and check that episode out, and go and check Jen out if you haven't. I'm sure you have.
Yeah, no,
On
she's
LinkedIn.
fantastic. She's I credit her for actually bringing me into evangelism. I saw what she was doing at the Challenger sale, and I had messaged her, and yeah, we came up with a little plan, and 2 weeks later, I had the role. So yeah, big fan of Jen and everything she's done at Challenger and now at Lavender.
There you go. Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't know that. That she helped you sort of build out. So was it like she helped you build out this almost pitch, this hypothesis of why Chili Piper needed you?
You know what? It's we have a funny story, and we still talk about like we need to go on a podcast together so we can talk about it. I actually we sponsor Hype Cycle and the Go-to-Market Games, and she was a guest judge talking about teaching marketers how to sell. And as part of our sponsorship, after her whole workshop, I got a chance to demo her Chili Piper. And she's just like, oh my gosh, I deal with this problem all the time. Like, help me sell this upwards to management. And we just really hit it off from that point forward. Yeah, I think like she respected the sales skills, and we just kept in touch. I remember at one point the rep closed, lost the deal, and I was like, what is going on? Like, I thought this was a done deal. Jen was like so motivated. She knows the pain, because she told me every call she has to start with, hey, sorry, it's taken 2 weeks for us to reach out to you, because their lead routing was so poor, and every call started with an apology. And she's like, I feel this pain. We need to solve it. And I asked her, I was like, hey, the rep closed, lost the deal. What happened? She's like, RevOps kiboshed it, but basically, hold my beer. I got this. And a month later, she worked her magic, ended up being a pretty big deal. I'll tell you, it paid for our annual sponsorship of this community and then some. And we just had a relationship ever since. And I saw what she was doing on the evangelist side. She had shared an article by Ethan Butte where he interviewed 10 other evangelists. And that was the eye-opening moment for me, where I was like, this might be where I could actually impact Chili Piper the most, of like, knowing that I've sold this, knowing that we've built like the field marketing department, but I can kind of sit in between this role. So yeah, she had shared that resource. She had invited me to an evangelist. I was part of an evangelist community before I even had the title. And yeah, just a great soundboard to be like, hey, this is how I'm thinking of presenting it, and just giving her my thoughts and having her double check it. So yeah, she's awesome. I'm a big fan of Jen.
And out of curiosity, what was the topic you were thinking of doing with Jen as a podcast?
She invited me.
Was it the teaching marketers how to sell? Is that the topic, or what would you do?
No. So this was back when she was still at Challenger, and she was hosting the podcast there. And I think I don't know if it was like how to build rapport or how to like arm your champion or something like that. And we were just going to talk about our literal like story of how we met, and how, yeah, I ignited something in her, and she's like, I'm your champion. Tell me how to sell this to the C-suite, and running all these reports. So we're just going to talk about, I guess, yeah, how to build rapport and how to arm your champion to sell upwards for you. I mean, I guess I did a decent enough job on that first call, but I think it just struck a point with Jen of how, yes, she deals with this pain all the time, and she saw a better way of handling it. And she really went to bat of selling Chili Piper. So find yourself a champion like Jen, and yeah, you'll be good to go in the sales cycle.
But you never got round to recording that episode.
No. And then I know she kind of started stepping down from Challenger and then went to Lavender. So yeah, we always talk about like, man, we have to film some sort of footage of
why don't we make it happen? I'll tell you what, why don't we do I'll reach out after, and we'll get you and Jen on to tell the real world story of that building rapport and how it can benefit. I think that would be a great episode. So let's make it happen. I can do all the editing and stuff, which should save you a job.
Hell yeah. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, Jen's listening to this. Let's do it, Jen. The world's been waiting for this origin story and how we got a chance to sell to each other. Yeah, and use the Challenger approach on Challenger. So it was great. Yeah, I'd love to make it happen.
Wicked, right? Well, we'll get round to that, but back to the topic.
Yep.
I think this is quite a nice segue actually into Chili Piper's sort of success story in terms of your setup, right? Because I was going to ask about like your thoughts on the role of technology in how lead qualification tools like or lead routing tools like Chili Piper can basically alleviate or remove the need for these inbound SDRs or whatever. So in terms of your setup then, how is Chili Piper set up from a sales function point of view?
Yeah. So right on the form, this is what's a little unique to Chili Piper versus some of those other scheduling and routing systems. We are taking into account how the buyer is filling out the form. And granted, you either have to ask certain questions that give you an understanding of, one, whether or not that buyer is qualified. So for us, we can only sell to Salesforce or HubSpot CRM. So if they were to select in the pick list that they had a different CRM, that's our first note for saying, hey, let's not show a calendar. We hear this all the time. Buyers saying, yeah, we can put up a calendar, but then we're just going to flood A's calendars with poor quality leads. So that's one way of saying, can they at least buy your product? If not, let's not show a calendar. And then we route based on SMB, mid-market, enterprise, just different employee tiers. So we have like 1 to 10, 11 to 50. As sales reps actually increase their win rate, they get exposure to these larger queues and larger deals. So on the form, we're trying to identify, one, can we even sell to them? Do they have HubSpot or Salesforce? And two, how big is the company? So we determine, are we routing them to an SMB team, a mid-market team, or an enterprise team? The other thing that we do is we look up account ownership in your CRM. So Chili Piper's a little cutthroat. Just because an A sent an email 6 months ago doesn't mean that they now own the account. You have to be working that account for 60 days, or the past 60 days.
Yeah, it's the same for us. The same for us internally. I think that's fair, isn't it? 60 days.
It is. I think it's good, right? Like if there has to be some sort of trigger event, and I think 60 days covers it. So if there isn't a 60-day account activity, then we just treat it as a net new lead and say, hey, just because you own the account in Salesforce doesn't mean this inbound goes to you. We're just going to go through the traditional routing process. So yeah, that's really how we have it set up. Like I mentioned a little earlier, SDRs are 100% outbound. So anyone that requests a demo through Chili Piper's website will be routed to an AE where they can discuss pricing, they can answer your buying questions, and they can show you the product.
Yeah, no, I think I saw this in a Chili Piper post, but you've got circa something like 15 to 20 SDRs, something like that globally, is it?
Yeah, we do. I know we have an EMEA team. Man, for those companies that are hiring globally, I know our Brazil team just keeps getting bigger and better. We've had really a lot of our top SDRs, for whatever reason, come from Brazil.
It must be the sun.
Yeah, exactly.
The sun, the beaches, and the good drink and the good food.
Exactly. I think everybody's smiling, everybody's having a good time there. So that sounds about right. I'd say between 15 to 20 SDRs.
Yeah, I think in our use case journey, we completed a form and we were routed to Heather Leo, and then nice. we had Heather for, I hate to say it, for probably about a year. I feel bad for keeping her stringing her along for a year, but that's how long it took us to buy. But we were routed to Heather, and I think that was a very good result for her. She's awesome, and I think she's just gone off. She's had a baby now as well. Yeah. So congrats to Heather.
Congrats to her.
Yeah, that was we were routed to Heather in that example. Just to check, if you got a hard stop at 4 p.m. or 4 p.m. our time,
I can go a little bit over.
Cool. Because I wanted to talk about the B2B buyer best practices report that I think you co-authored. Because I think there was a lot of findings that came out of that report that kind of reinforce what we've spoken about for the past 45 minutes in terms of, I guess, the number of companies within the report across the industries that are still gating the high intent demand, or they're still routing or still not routing prospects effectively, or sharing pricing. So I don't know if you had some figures at the top of your mind or some of the highlights from that report that just reinforce the why you have this opinion or why you have this stance of what we've spoken about.
Yeah, of course. So this was a fun little experiment that we did. We used the peer signal list of the top 100 SaaS companies. So this spans across different verticals, but I guess by valuation, these are the top 100 SaaS companies. And we had this hypothesis, and this actually came from a Nevada study, where they had just qualitatively interviewed, I think, 30 B2B buyers, director level plus titles, and they were just trying to understand, hey, what is it exactly that you're looking for when you purchase software? And it was, one, can I touch and feel the product before speaking with sales, and not necessarily just watching a product video, more of this interactive demo. Two, what does that first call experience look like? And 3, how quickly can I actually a couple things. Is there pricing? Are they giving me a range so I can go in there thinking, okay, this might be within my budget? And then the third one is, how quickly I can get that next step scheduled. And then what is that result of the first call? So we heard this from buyers of saying, this is what we want in a buying journey. And we said, okay, let's take this top 100 SaaS companies and put them to the test. Let's see if they're showing pricing, if they have interactive demos, are they letting me book right off the form when I show high intent? And if they're not, how long does it actually take for me to get a human response? Not that, hey, thanks for requesting a demo, somebody would be in touch with you in 24 to 48 hours. We actually wanted to measure that. So just a couple of high level stats from that buyer journey report. 57% of companies showed pricing, which I thought was great. I think a lot of people thought that was going to be a lot lower. So we're definitely trending in the right direction there. I'm curious from your perspective, Jamie, what do you think out of those 57% of companies that had a pricing page, how many do you think actually showed pricing?
Oh, see, I have read this report, but I actually can't remember the figure. So, what was the question again?
So they have a pricing page.
Yeah.
How many actually show pricing on that pricing page?
Right. Okay. 1/3.
It's a little higher, 80% of those. So if you have a pricing page, turns out you're probably, but 20% are still trying to do the bait and switch of, oh, here you're on a pricing page.
So annoying.
Sales, right? So that was good. The other numbers weren't as great. So the interactive demo piece, I think maybe this is a little bit more of a novel idea, but we recorded 17% of those top 100 SaaS companies did have an interactive demo that you could play around with before requesting to speak with sales. And then came the part that obviously Chili Piper impacts, which is that direct scheduling ability. We know this is what buyers want. They don't want to do back and forth through email, find a time, just let them pick a time at their moment of highest intent. We only saw 10.5%, 11% of companies have direct calendar booking, which kind of shocked me. I thought this wasn't as novel as an idea, but most of them are still using that very traditional manual process of, okay, somebody will be in touch, have the SDR receive that lead, maybe do a little bit of research, try and reach out to them, find a time that works. When we measured how long it took for us to get back, I'll ask you another question of this because I'm always intrigued by what people think. How many no responses do you think we got? Like not even a single email.
Okay, so my trick question alarm's going off like it's going to be high, isn't it? I'm probably like 40%.
Pretty close. 35% of companies didn't even email us back and say, hey, and look, granted, I know there's a couple of things to that. We said there's vertical SaaS, maybe Chili Piper wasn't a right buyer, but what's the harm in sending an email of saying, hey, you know what? You're not our traditional ICP. You're not who we traditionally sell to. Is there a problem you're looking to solve that you think we can help you out with?
They're obviously making so much money that they just didn't. Yeah, it's a champagne problem, that is, isn't it?
Yeah. And I will say, like, there was vertical SaaS companies there, some that did respond to me, and some big names that you would have thought, okay, they must have their inbound lead process up to par. But 35% of companies never responded to us, and on average, it took us 2 days to get a human response. So I think everybody tries to refer to that whole speed to lead 5 minutes, right? Let's get in touch as quickly as possible, but it was so interesting. Some of these were maybe after 5 o'clock, right? And depending on time zone where you're at, and it would take so long to get a human response just for someone to reach out and then ask, hey, does this time work? So just those high level stats, a lot left to be desired by what buyers are saying they want in a buyer's journey. And these aren't from like startup companies either that are just figuring it out. These are top 100 SaaS companies.
That's what I was thinking, like 35%, but 35% across the entire, country might make sense, but 35% in the 100 best, inverted commas, because that the report clearly shows that just because you got your revenues the highest or your valuation is the highest, it doesn't necessarily mean your processes are the most optimal or efficient. Did you get any quantitative or qualitative feedback on how many of the requests that you sent routed to an SDR or had an engagement with an SDR over an AE?
Yeah, this was another thing that we were looking at as well. About 2/3, so 67% were routed to an SDR. It was nice to see. I think about 25% were routed to an AE. And then I'm looking at the study now, 8% were routed to others. So this maybe was more PLG type of companies where they're routing me to customer success in some instances, where they're routing me to product experts. So that was nice to see. But still, the majority of them are doing that. Hey, we're not letting you book some time, and it's typically an SDR trying to book time on behalf of their AE. 67% of the time, that's what we saw.
Yeah, mad, isn't it? Just over 2/3 with that additional step in the process. Right, I got 2 more questions, and then I'll let you go. So what's your take then on future trends or future predictions in terms of the kind of the things we've discussed of like, will there be inbound SDRs? Do we think the market's going to retract and there'll be more full cycle? What's your thoughts on where that's going to go over the next, say, 12 to 24 months?
I do think we are going to see a reduction in sales. And as a result, I think back to more of those full cycle. I think, one, it doesn't align with the buyer's journey. Two, as we saw during those crazy valuations, if you're not growing at the rate at which VCs expect, which truth be told is very hard, the whole triple, double, or whatever you want to call it, like it's insane growth rates. But I think we're also seeing new of these go-to-market motions, right? Product-led growth, even partnerships. And I know, what is it, Nearbound? I've been seeing come around of like using your network, go to network instead of go to market. So I think like we're seeing more of those motions that will, I don't want to say deprioritize, but put less of an emphasis on this like outbound or sales-led growth. I really like this idea that Carl Ferrer has, where he calls them sales team 6, right? Like SWAT team 6, where you're going to have a highly specialized sales force that majority is probably going to be inbound, because we're seeing buyers want to purchase tools on their own. So I think like there's going to be a little bit more of a focus on marketing and maybe partnerships. And then you're going to have a highly tactical specialized sales team that just handles these requests. Their calendars are full. Obviously, there's still room for outbound, and as we know, not everybody's in buy now mode, so there's still going to be that. But I think the way that we see what buyers are asking for and how they're relying more on their peers. One thing that I'm even trying to bring to life here is actually getting our customers, or our chili champions, as we like to call them, involved in the sales process, using their networks and saying, hey, this person is a valuing chili piper. Hey, these are target accounts. Do you know anybody here that you can help us break into this account? And of course, they get paid out on that through our partnership and referral program. But I do think we're gonna move away from most of the headcount or budget going towards hiring sales reps and having it be more balanced across the entire life cycle. I think expansion revenue and this land and expand motion is going to become more and more important. Of cool, you brought a customer in, but are you expanding them to different product lines? So I think we'll see less of an emphasis on outbound sales-led growth motions, cutting down a little bit on that, having more highly specialized tactical sales team, and more balance across the headcount when it comes to marketing, sales, and CS.
And then last question for you is podcast and nominate. So who do I need to get on the podcast next, and why?
Man, I've talked about him twice now. Have you interviewed Carl Ferrer yet, or no?
You know what? I've D Acosta recommended him, and like I can't get Carl to reply to me. So Carl's been ghosting me.
You and me both. He always talks about how he takes cold calls, and I'm like, I don't know whose cold call he's taking because I'm trying to warm up those calls, and I still can't get a hold of him. Just a little
Yeah,
bit, but
I'd love to get Carl on because I think I've been sort of following him or seeing him since Refine Labs sort of days, and I think I'd love to get him on. So that we'll see if we can make that happen. If one of us can get through to him at least, or maybe we'll just put all 17 of your outbound SDRs call in to Carl and see if we can book him in.
Exactly. Yeah. Let's make the intro happen. I think he's brilliant. Really looking at sales in a modern way, and I think he'd be an awesome guest. So if you're listening to this, Carl, you respond to our outbound calls and hop on this podcast.
All right, and look, I just want to say we've gone slightly over 7 minutes over so far, but I think that's been a very, very good and in-depth chat about why inbound SDR shouldn't exist, and I think hopefully that's given an impartial but a very honest sort of view of why. But no, I appreciate you jumping on. Hopefully it wasn't too strenuous for you, and I'm sure we'll have to get you back on for another episode. But I appreciate you jumping on.
Yeah, of course, Jamie. This was a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to bringing that story of how me and Jen Allen met through a sales cycle to life. So let's make it happen.
Yeah, we'll make that happen. And for those that are listening, please remember to follow or subscribe, whatever platform you're on. Please leave a review; it really does help. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit the like button, subscribe, and we will see you in the next episode.